Okay, got it. Sweet. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. Put in the chat where you guys are joining from. I always like to see where everyone is. I am in the Midwest, and that will kind of come into play whenever I present today. So my name is Shannon, and I'm an illustrator with Copic. I've been using Copic markers since I was a teenager. So I love them, and I really love the blendability with these. And so today I'm going to share some of my tips and tricks that I've learned over the years and share how I draw an architectural landscape piece. And today, oh man, lots of comments in the chat from where y'all are from. Today I'm going to be using a particular landmark from my city, Kansas City, and it's an art museum. And I'll be showing the outside of that and how I draw it and how I use 3 key colors, an earth tone, some green, and some blue to color the exterior. And so with that, I'm going to switch to my overhead view. Perfect, thank you so much. And thank you guys for commenting. I really love to see where you guys are from. So again, this particular building, and this is just a printed photograph, is an art museum where I'm from. And so this is the Nelson Atkins Art Museum in my city. And being an artist, I love visiting this particular place. And so this is what I'm going to share today. And I chose a very simple viewpoint, just straight on from the front of the building. So it's not too complicated with the perspective. So this one is more geared towards beginners, but there's still a lot of detail in the front of this building, so I'll be sure to go into that. Yes, I see somebody wrote shuttlecocks, that's true. In the front of this museum, there's little sculptures and whatnot too. It's a very iconic part of the city that I'm from. And so today I'm hoping to inspire you guys to draw something where you're from, whether it's an art museum, maybe it's your own house, or maybe you went to Paris and you want to draw the Eiffel Tower. So wherever you are from, I'm hoping these little tips and tricks will help if you do want to bring a photo that you've taken to life. And so I actually have, before we get started, just a very simple version of this image, how I turned it into a Copic drawing. And so there's a lot of symmetry involved here, a lot of layering in the grass. These are all little hills. And so I show how to create perspective from just the different types of blending that I do here. And then also some blending in the building itself behind. And so this is similar to what we'll get to by the end of the class today, if you're following with me on a sheet of marker paper. And this piece of paper is just 8.5 by 11. So it's the same kind of size that I printed the photo reference from. And so all I did to get started was take my ruler and I just measured 5.5 inches and drew a line straight down the middle. So just to divide my page in half. And during the class today, I do have this finished piece up top, just so you guys could keep seeing what the finished product will look like. And down here, I'll lift this up for you guys to see, I have a couple of lines. So I just took my ruler and drew a couple of lines. This line right here, it just divides my picture plane in half because the photo that I'm using to bring to life is very symmetrical, which is helpful. So I just drew a line right down the middle. And so hopefully when I'm drawing, whatever I draw on one side, I can just repeat on the other. And so that's why I have that vertical guideline in place. And then these 2 lines here, I drew that are 2 inches. This is like a 2-inch thick area. And that's going to represent my building. So that's my museum. And then I'll add more of this on top. I'll add that as we go. But I just want to let you guys know that using a ruler just to get the guidelines started is very, very helpful. So whether you want to mimic this exactly, realistically, those are obviously going to help a lot, or just to get a good measure of, say you want to sketch in more of an urban sketch environment where it's looser strokes. This also just gives a good template to work from. So I definitely recommend just taking your ruler out with whatever image you're going to refer to and just make a nice little grid just to get started from. And so with that, I'll move some of my supplies. Oh, I just want to say I have a pencil eraser. This helps for precise erasing in small areas. This is a really nice tool. And then I just have a regular eraser and then a mechanical pencil. This one is 0.5. So it's going to have a thinner lead, better for precise drawing. So this is just a drafting pencil that I like to use. And so I'm going to use my ruler for probably the first 10 minutes here, just to kind of get my grid lines and just the general gist from the photo. And so you take your photo, and I'm just going to measure what this front entrance is of the building. And so that's about 3 inches, give or take. And so I'll just go on my page, and I'm going to do 1.5 inches on either side of my center vertical line. I'm just going to pencil these in real quick from the bottom and from the top. And then I'm just going to connect those. You can use your ruler here too. I'm trying to work faster to get to the coloring part. But there we go. So we've got that kind of front entrance area done. And then I will measure this top portion. It's about 1/2 inch. So I will measure that from this middle vertical line as well, and mark that, just like a little tick mark. I'm not like putting a dot per se, but just a little tick mark. And then I'm going to draw a loose line. And here in the sketching process, I'm sorry, I turn my page a lot, but when you're sketching loose, I usually hold the pencil, that my hand is further back on the pencil to get a loose stroke. It's a lot easier to get a loose stroke like this instead of holding it tight. So it's just a little pointer. So usually I'll hold the pencil further back in my hand and loosely add that line. And then this is where I just start to kind of guesstimate where to add things. So there's just a little deviation here between this part of the building and what's behind it. So I'll just draw a little line here to create some more of that perspective. There we go. And then use that eraser. It's always good to press lightly, especially when you're sketching. And what we see so far is just a bunch of rectangles. And so that's the best way to get started when you're trying to draw a building. Unless it's a very organic shaped building, then that might not be the same approach, but usually buildings have a very geometric linear look to them. So all that we're going to start with is just a bunch of rectangles. And so that's all we're doing. And next part is, I'll let this up. We have some stairs here. And so I'm going to draw 2 horizontal lines to kind of establish where these stair lines are. So I'm going to do that next, just to establish those stairs. And so I'll take my ruler. It's about 1/2 inch. So I will take my page. And from this bottom line of my building, I'm just going to make 1/2 inch tick marks. And this time I am going to use my ruler. And I'm just going to connect those lightly. And then I'm just going to scoot my ruler up a little bit and draw another line. So it's not exactly divided in half, because this staircase in the front is further up in space than the one behind it. And so this is when the perspective aspect comes into play, and why I wanted to start off with a simpler viewpoint of the building, because perspective can get very tricky and very complicated. Even as doing this for as long as I have, it can get very overwhelming. So we just want to try and push those things in the foreground up, and then the things behind it back. And when you're drawing, I always like to make more contrast than probably necessary, just to make sure that it's easy to visually translate. And so there I have kind of the staircase line. And then I'll start adding in some of those details. And so I'm going to close off this roof line up here. Just add that line across. And then I'm going to add some of these details over here. So there's a little bit of detailing in this area, the top of the building and up here. So I'm just going to add a few vertical lines to establish these areas at the top of the building. And again, I'm just kind of guesstimating on the amount. So I'm going to turn my page. It's easier for me to draw a line vertically than horizontally. So that's why I usually turn my page. This is just kind of a personal choice here. There we go, adding that. And then similar to what I was saying about perspective. Oh, my pencil was darker. I'm sorry, I'm also pressing really lightly. That's probably why it's not showing up. But notice how the front of the building, obviously the lines are a little higher than back here. The lines appear a little lower, and that's a perspective trick. And so when I add my next line to show that ridge of that building, I'm going to draw it a little bit lower than the one up here. And so that's just, again, a little perspective trick. And so turn this, so a little bit lower, and then I will bring it up. And I'll repeat that on the other side. I'm sorry, I'm pressing pretty light. Okay, I can lift this up. There we go. So
maybe
right
Shannon,
now,
once you finish a section, maybe pull it up and show the audience.
yeah.
Okay.
So this is where I am so far. And so I know it looks kind of strange right now, but we have those stairs here. We have the front of the building here, the top. We're trying to create a little bit of perspective now by kind of arranging the ridge of the ceiling detail down a little bit. And so that's where I'm at right now. I'm going to drop this here. And I've established these areas pretty well so far. So I'm going to start adding in the detail from the front entrance of the building. And so here we have 6 different columns, and we have one main door and then 2 entrances from the other side. So this is what I'm going to be focusing on, just these elements right in the middle. And so what I'm going to start with is the columns. And I'm going to reset the line there. Since I've made a vertical line straight down the middle of my picture plane, I'm going to place 3 lines off to one side and 3 lines to the right. And oh, actually, I'm sorry, before that, this line up here where I made this top portion of the building, I'm basically just going to bring that down and finish off that side of the building real quick before I start to add in the columns, because that is the closing portion of the front entrance. So I'm just going to bring that down real quick. Okay, and then erase those lines in between. Now that I've established kind of that border of the front, now I'm going to add 3 vertical lines on one side and on the other. And they're literally just straight lines. Now I will lift this up in 1 second and explain my method to my madness here. Okay. Because my pencil is so light, I just want to do this. But the reason why I just draw 1 line is because I'm trying to guess the amount of space on either side. And so once I get the placement down, then I will kind of beefen up the column to make them thicker. And so, because typically for me, if I have a whole bunch of lines going on, it gets very confusing. And so I just do 1 line very light. And now I'm going to go in, now that I know the placement, I'm going to widen these columns and give them, you know, the strength that they deserve. And so I'm just going to go in and make them wider. So it's going to look a little confusing. There's going to be a bunch of lines, but I usually do that for placement, and that works very well even for lettering. If you're trying to make a bold stroke or letter, just getting the skeleton down, the thin line really does help. Okay, and so right here, again, there's a bunch of little lines, but I'm going to take that pencil eraser, the eraser at the fine sharp point, and erase this middle part to establish the width of my column. I hope this is making sense to everyone. It usually works out pretty well in the end, but it's much easier, especially if you mess up your placement, to erase 6 lines versus 12. So that's just a little cheat. So here we are. We have 1, 2, 3. There's our middle vertical line, and then 1, 2, 3. So those are our 6 columns. And again, this is also why just making that simple grid to your composition really does help guide you. And so there we go. And then we need to make like the front little entrance doorways. And so about a little less than half the way down, I'm just going to draw a horizontal line between the columns. There we go. And they come to a little like point at the top. And so I'm just going to make a little point. And I'm not trying to make this exact copy of the photo. I'm just trying to capture the essence of it. And so here's what I did. I just made like a little curved triangle to establish where those doorways are. And the next thing I'm going to do is add the little kind of swirly detail to the top of the column. And basically all that is, if I lift this photo reference up, there's just like a little circle on each side connected by 2 lines. So that's all I'm going to do to mimic that essence. I'm also choosing, okay, let me see, maybe like 1/8 of an inch. We're not going to do too much. It's just in there for detail. But I'm trying to choose a simpler architectural structure, but I feel like whenever you start drawing anything, it starts to get more detailed than you expected. But it's always easier to start with a smaller piece of art, just so it won't get too overwhelming. If I were to draw this in a much bigger scale, I could achieve more detail, but it's almost more intimidating. It gets a little overwhelming. So I worked in a 8.5 by like 5.5 inches. So whichever size though works best for you is totally fine. I'm just trying to give reference to the size of my workspace. And so there we go. I've just added little details to each column. And I'm going to add little rectangles down at the base of each column to show, you know, where they are finished, where they're done, where they meet the ground. So I'm just doing little rectangles at the bottom. Just doing 6 quick little rectangles. And I'm going to darken these columns. Now that I know they're in the place that they need to be, I'm just going to beefen them up. Perfect. I'm going to add little details to the door now. Just a few horizontal lines. I'm doing this pretty fast. I'll lift this up when I'm done. Okay, so I'm trying to capture that essence more of the door. And now I'm going to move up to this area up here, add in those window details. So I'll do that next. In my photograph, there are 5 little windows at the top, and the middle one is literally straight in the middle of the building. So I'll add a little rectangle there. And then I'll add 2 more on either side. And these ones I am making a little bit larger than the actual picture, but I'm doing that artistic take, I guess, because I like adding that little splash of blue from the tint of the window. So you don't have to copy it exactly, but there we go. Okay. Oh, and I actually realized a little mistake I made. So up in here, this little part of the top of the building, it does not go flush with the edge. Did you notice how this area looks a little more lifted out, and this back part needs to be pushed back into space more. And down in here, I actually made it flush with the edge of the building. So I do need to make that little adjustment to get the perspective. So I am going to adjust that really quick. This is why I always like to press lightly to the page so that erasing doesn't become a big issue. Okay. And then, yes, I added those little windows, and then I'm just going to add a few more horizontal lines to add those ridges to the building. So I'm going to turn my page and just add a few lines. I'm just going to add 2. And remember, what's behind it is further back in space, so they're going to be a little below. There we go. I'm going to add a few lines here as well on this portion that's directly above the columns. I'm going to add one on the top and one on the bottom. And I'm going to lift this up. Okay. So all I'm doing here is just adding some details. So I'm adding some details in the top area of the building. And I'm going to add the detail of the stairs with the markers, not with my pencil. I did that up here. So I will show you how to do this with the markers. So have no fear, that's coming soon. What I'm going to do next is establish the sides of the building. And so in a similar way, I'm going to add these horizontal lines to give the accent to each kind of ridge of the building. And so I will do that here. And what I'm going to do now is draw another line underneath this. And like I've been saying earlier, kind of stacking of the building gives it new perspective. I'm going to erase this top line to try and make the front stand out more. And again, I'll refer to the picture, because after all, we are referring to a picture to turn into a Copic drawing. And so this part of the building is further back in space than the front juts out. So I erased that top line to make sure that these lines are lower, and by lowering them, it gives the illusion of perspective. So I'm erasing that top line to try and make the front stand out more. So that's all I'm doing right here. So I'm drawing 2 lines, but I'm erasing one of them. And again, I'm just doing that to create more of that perspective. And you look at a building from the front and you think, oh, that's easy. It's just a couple of rectangles and there you go. But with the perspective and trying to make it look more realistic, you do have to make sure your lines are placed in the right order. Otherwise, it kind of doesn't make much sense. So that's all I'm just trying to bring awareness to when you're drawing. Okay, so I'll lift this up. Now you can kind of see how the front pops out a little more because I moved these lines down a little bit, just like I did up here. So I'm just trying to mimic that down here as well. And I'm going to draw another line underneath here. Again, I just like to turn my page. It's much easier for me to draw a vertical line freehand than it is a horizontal line. Holding my hand further back of my pencil, getting good wrist movement here. Okay. There we go. And if I am moving too fast, this will be recorded. So please take a look back at it if I'm going too quickly. So there we go. We kind of established that. And now I'm going to add in some of the window detailing. So these windows here are very pretty. Lots of lines going on inside each window. But all I'm going to do to start is to capture the outline and the general placement. Again, I'm not looking for photorealism. That'd be very difficult to do in 1 hour. So I'm just going to kind of place them either, where I want them or in the general area. So we have like 2 windows kind of close, and then there's a little bit more space, and then there's 2 windows. So in this particular building, they're kind of grouped in pairs of 2. And so I'm going to try and mimic that here. And so like the columns, I'm just going to draw a bunch of vertical lines relatively in the same position. But this is a little trick I have, so stay tuned. I will reveal my secret. Okay, so I have 4 lines here, 4 lines here. A little bit more space is in the middle. Let me repeat that really quick, and then I will lift up my paper. So I got 2 lines, space. I'm going to use the width of my pointer finger as kind of a guide here. 2 lines, and there's space. Yeah, so it's about the same distance. Okay, so right now I just have a bunch of vertical lines, very similar to what I did to make the columns. Now all I'm going to do is I'll turn my page, and I'm just going to draw one continuous line to close the shape of the window. And so that way they'll all be lined up very similarly. So I'm drawing one big vertical line. And I'll draw one again on top. And then I'll repeat that on the other side of the building. I'm pressing pretty light because I'm going to do some erasing here. Okay, so I drew 2 big sets of vertical lines. And now I'll see, like right here, whoop, I didn't actually, this is not closed yet. So I will close this line, and then I will erase what's in between, like this space and this space here. And that's usually how I get all of my windows or those details to line up, because otherwise it can get very tricky. I want my windows to all look in the same line, but they all end up being a little bit cattywampus. So I just want to make sure they're all in the same line. Okay, and this precision eraser, always a big plus. All right, and then I'm just cleaning up my lines, making them a little bit darker, closing those windows. Okay. Oh, and then I'm going to add a few little details. So in my picture, there's a little statue here. It's like a thinking man. He's got like his hand on his head, or his head on his hand, excuse me. But I'm going to omit the statue. I'm not going to draw him. I just don't want to have to worry about it. So I'm going to take it out. That's the artist privilege. But I am going to add these little details here on either side. I think these are cute. I think they add a little bit of flair to it. So I am going to add those like little vessel looking things. And then I'm going to add some detail over on the kind of the, I guess, wall perimeter of the building. And then I'll add a little bit of foliage, and we'll get to coloring. So I'm just going to add these little like vessel shapes. So I'm kind of adding a U shape here on either side. These are small details. If you want to substitute this for like a tree or a shrub shape, that's also fine. And then I'm going to add a line to make sure that area stands out. And then we've got either side of the wall here. I'm just going to make that area stand out a little bit, vertical lines. And then I've got some ridges, like slices in this wall. So I will add that as well. Let's see. Actually, I'm going to bring that up a little bit. So this is improvising here, but I took this line up a little bit further than my original line. And I'm going to draw another horizontal line here. And this very small space is going to be where I put those slats of the wall. So let me add that real quick. Of this class, the drawing is definitely the most difficult part. The coloring is actually quite simple. That is the joy of Copic markers, though. They're very easy to blend. And I have a few tricks on how I achieve like the shrubbery look as well. So that'll be very fun. Okay, so let's see. In my picture, I have about 3 groups of these little slats on either side. I'm not really going to count all of these. I don't need to get that precise. So I'll do about 5 or 6 little lines and then space them apart. So I'll start right here. Okay, so that's 6. And then I'll give it a break. 3, 4, 5, 6. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that looks about good. I'll hold my paper up in just 1 second. I'm going to try and mimic this on the right side with the spacing and all. If it's not exactly right, though, I can always erase it, or I can just keep it as is. But I will say this, I guess I don't know what percentage of people are right-handed versus left, but because I am right-handed, I usually do the left first and then I go to the right because my hand's not covering it so I can see what I've just done, and then I copy it to the right. If you're left-handed, I would recommend doing the opposite approach, but if I want to copy what I've just done, usually left first, then right works the best for me. And that way you're not smudging or blending anything with the bottom of your hand. If you do draw a lot, you probably know that struggle with the graphite getting on the bottom of your hand. So that's just another pointer, usually left than right. And if you're left-handed, the opposite way works great. Okay, so this is what we've got so far with just a lot of rectangles and shapes. We've got our general gist of the building. The last few things we're going to do before we color is slice up the hills, the little ripple effects at the bottom. So as you can see here, this museum has like gradual hills that goes to the top. So I'm going to add some lines here to signify where those ripples occur. And at the top, I'm going to try to hold this up. They're going to be closer to each other because that's further back in space. Right where the camera is standing, these lines are obviously further away. So that's another perspective trick. These lines will be clustered closer, these ones a little further away. And I did that up here too. So these lines are close and then these two are pretty far apart. So it gives it that pushed back in space kind of look. So I'm going to pencil in, I'm just doing little hash marks. And me personally, I like to do it in the middle just to kind of gauge what it looks like. So let's say about there. And then I need to space it a little more and then space it a little more. And I'll lift this up. This is all just kind of guess and check right here. So I want to have like 4 different widths of this rippling hill. So this area is pretty big. This one will be a little smaller, and then the smallest. So you see how I have 3 different lines here. It's just to signify that. And now I will complete those lines. I'm actually going to take my ruler for this. Lightly add these lines. Oops. Okay. There we go. And here we are. So I have some lines here in the bottom where that landscape is. And if you are following along today and you're like, I don't want to worry about the hills or the rippling effect and the lawn, you don't have to. You can just color it green. Maybe you want to just color it green and add some like colorful shrubbery in the front. You know, we don't have to copy exact, but it's there for reference just to make sure we get perspective correct, to make it look realistic or give that realistic effect. It's not just a made up image. But yeah, and so there we go. We do have our 2 trees on either side. When this picture was taken, there's not a lot of other, you know, colorful plants around, but I think I might mimic that and add my own flair. We have some trees over here, we have a tree right here. what I'm going to do, because I just like to do it this way, I add like thick shrubbery on either side and why I did this is to kind of create this V-like effect in my composition to make this part really stand out. So that's just a compositional choice, right? So there's two little paths. They're like a gravel pebble pathway on either side. And these right here and here are kind of V up to the center. And then the shrubbery kind of brings it down. And so I'm creating like this interesting composition that might not be in my picture. So that's just why I added shrubbery that went up in this direction. Now you can mimic your picture, but that's just why I chose this. And so I'm going to do the same thing down here as well. And all I do to create the shape of vegetation is I loosely kind of like scribble, like do a little scribble outline. And so I'm going to do that right about where that second, the second group of little tick marks where that kind of railing is. I'm going to start here and bring shrubs over, and then I'll carry some trees behind it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring some loose shrubbery, just kind of like a little bush towards the bottom. And then I have like two levels or two groups of trees right behind it. So I'm going to mimic something like that. And this is another reason why I like to press lightly, because I'm going to end up erasing some stuff behind here. And so I'm just going to bring, they're loose. I mean, I can change the shape if I want. And then I'll mimic something similar on the other side. You still want it to look organic because it's vegetation. It's not like, you know, a brick stone building. And I'm going to take that pencil eraser and erase the stuff that I no longer need underneath. There we go. I erased almost a little bit too much there. And then I'll do the same on the right side. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to do, lift this up real quick. So that's where I am right now. I've got just a very thin outline of where I want the vegetation to go with this small level of shrubbery. And if you want to make that larger or make another level of shrubs, that's totally fine too. Again, I mimicked that on the other side. And I'm going to add these little pathways, these brown pebblestone pathways now. And I'm just going to add slightly slanted lines. And I want to make sure they get larger as I move down in space. And so I will pick this up. Okay, so what I did here, I just chose to start the path. Since this is like the front of the building, the staircase, I went over a little bit to the left. I did two angled lines, and then I scooted it over again, and I scooted it over again. And this is mimicking the same perspective technique up here. To make this look further back in space, you kind of scoot it down. This is scooted, I guess, from the perspective of standing right here, the camera, you're moving it back into space because our central perspective point is somewhere back in here. So that's why I'm moving the lines back and they're getting smaller. I hope that makes sense, but it's just trying to move it back into space. Okay, and I'll mimic something similar over here. And again, I'm not too worried if it's not exactly perfect. Sometimes it's nice to see those imperfections in your drawings. They make us human. Otherwise, we would just keep the photo as the photo. And I can erase if I need to. I think I might change a little bit here. Okay, lift it up. That looks about right. And there's the general outline. And I did go pretty fast because this class is only an hour, so I'm sorry if I did go too quick. But if anyone has any prospective questions in the chat, feel free to ask. But I am going to move on to the coloring with our Copic markers. And today I have a group, like I said in the very beginning, 3 main color groups or families. I have some earth tones right over here. I have some greens, and then I have a few blues. So in honor of St. Patrick's Day, which was yesterday, I've got some beautiful greens, and these are the G2 family. These are all individual stock. This is not from a set, but I'm just letting you guys know. This one's the G2. So this one's G28. That's the darkest of the ones I'm going to use today. And then I have G24 and G21. So I chose these 2s because that 2 number in the front means that they all have the same vibrancy or saturation level. At 2, these are still pretty bold and bright colors. If the first number was like 9, that means they're going to be cooler or like more grayed down, less bright or saturated. And then the 1 indicates it's very light color, 4 means it's a mid-tone, and 8 means it's dark. So that second number means if it's light or dark. That first one is how bright or dull the color is. I just, in case you guys didn't know, just wanted to give that pointer when you're looking at buying individual markers. When you buy a marker in a set, obviously they're curated to look really good together, so you have no worries. But individually, sometimes it can be tricky. So I just want to give a little shout out there.
Shannon, right before you get into the coloring, we have a question about your line work. Arjumon wants to ask, do you mostly do freehand or use a ruler for your work?
Yeah, so I basically did both today. I do a lot of freehanding for smaller spaces, but for big spaces, I definitely like to use a ruler. It's just way easier. Oh, sorry, I didn't need to turn that. What I'm going to do is just erase some of this middle vertical line here before I start adding the grass. So, because another pointer, once you cover a Copic marker on top of pencil, you can't erase the pencil underneath. So I am going to erase my vertical line real quick because I don't want to keep that. Except in the door. That actually is nice. I need that there. Excuse me. But yeah, so I did a little bit of freehand up in here, but otherwise rulers are great. Okay. So what's nice about the Copic sketch marker, and all of our markers actually, is they have the broad nib. And so the broad nib does not get a lot of credit for some reason, but the broad nib is great. And I'm going to use that right now because it is a stiff nib. Let me hold that up. So it's a very stiff nib. It's not flexible like the super brush nib, but because it's stiff, you get a lot of precision. And so I'm going to use that now for this grass area. And so I'm going to start with my darkest color, which is G28. And I am going to add that to the bottom portion of each of these little hill areas. So I'm just going to use the fat side, this part right here, and I'm just going to draw a straight line. And I'm moving my hand, moving my whole arm, sorry. I'm not just doing this with my wrist, I'm gliding my entire hand lightly so I don't smudge any graphite, but I'm going to do another line. There's a little bit of overlap here. Slow and steady. It's kind of hard to do this while talking, but that's okay. And then I'm going to layer the bottom one again, layer number 2 on the bottom. And when you layer, especially with dark colors, the value change really starts to get noticeable. And I'm layering a second time from the top. Okay. So right now we've got this nice kind of a marker streak look, but that's okay. We will blend that out in just a second with G24. So I'm picking up that mid-tone of the G2s, and it's the side that doesn't have the gray stripe. Gray stripe is for the super brush, but I'm going to use that medium broad again, and I'm just going to go straight up. I'm overlapping with G28. And there's quite a value difference between these two colors. So I'm going to go right on top of it again. And then I'm going to go a little bit further up in my picture plane. Slow and steady. And then I'm going to go back over my first line again. G24, kind of have to use a lot of to blend out with the G28. And I know this looks kind of stripy right now, but we can blend this out. But this color, this right here is still the same color. It's still G24. It's just this one I've layered more times than that area. So it really does make a difference. The same color, just more and more layers. But your paper can only handle so much. So obviously this stripe right here, I layered a lot. I'm not there yet over here. So I've got plenty of room left with this cardstock. But yeah, I'm gonna do one more layer real quick, right in the intersection of where G24 and G28 meet. So they can have a little party and mix together. And then I'm gonna go to G21, lime green, again, medium broad, and I'm going to fill in the rest of this bottom area, overlapping with G24. So these colors are blending. Gotta be real careful there on that edge so I don't go into the other area, but I'm gonna layer one more time. And you guys can probably tell even from down here, there's not too much of a value jump between G21 and G24, but there is a lot going on here between 2.4 and 2.8. So what I'm going to do is use my super brush nib now of G24. And I'm going to use a circular motion to blend these more. So I'm going to, actually I'll start from the bottom. Do a little circular motion. And I'm working quickly up. And this circular motion usually picks up more of that G28. I'm like squeegeeing the paper almost to really pick up that pigment. And I can go back in again with smaller little circles. It's all about layering. And I chose two very drastically different colors to show you how many times you might have to layer, but we can already tell a little bit more of a difference right here, that this G24 is starting to blend out with the 2.8. Oh yes, I see somebody ask, are these markers permanent? Yes, they are. Okay, and then I'm going to take G21 and do the same thing with this super brush nib. Just squeegee it a little bit into that 2.4 area. And with this kind of effect on top of the strokes that I made with the medium broad nib, this gives it more of a grass look because grass isn't just linear. So I'm trying to add this kind of scumbling effect, these kind of like cloudy look, to make it look more like grass, because grass is more organic. And so basically all we need to do is repeat that to get up to the building. And so I'm already a little bit short on time, but I'm going to quickly do that with the other areas. I'm going to go back in with that medium broad, and I'm going to be really careful because I don't want to overlap into this other area. So I'm going to kind of outline that bottom area real quick with the tip right here to kind of prep that area. And then there we go. Okay, now I can add my line. Slow and steady. Okay, I need a little bit right here, so I use that edge of that medium broad nib. Again, the medium broad nib does not get enough credit. It really is a wonderful nib. Okay, now I'll do another one. Here we go. That's about right because I need to add 2 more colors on top, so that looks good. And then I'm going to use, so if you turn your medium broad nib this way, that is a great width. It's really consistent. You just go whoop straight off the page. So I will do that now. There we go. And then I'll do one more. Trying to divide it, give or take, into thirds. And then I've just got one little line down here. Oh, that one got a little wavy on me. Okay. And then G24. I'm working pretty fast. This one, remember, needs a lot of layers. Okay. And G21. Ooh, that's a marker streak sound right there. Okay. Okay. And for time's sake, I'm just going to keep this here for now because we're almost at that hour point. But let me see. The sky. Okay, large area with streaks. That's a good question. I will skip to the sky right now and I'll get to the building in a second. So the colors I have chosen for the sky, I've got B32. I like this color. What is it? Pale blue. And I also have B00, frost blue. I don't know if I need B01. I might, or I might just use these two. I'm not sure, but I'll stick with B32 to start. And for this one, I'm actually going to use the super brush nib just to get a general, yes, I did want to say this. I'm going to do dark to light so that there's more contrast right behind the building, and then it will fade to a bluer sky. That's a personal choice. It kind of looks like that in my picture too. And I think it makes the building stand out more since it's such a light tan. So I'm going to use dark to light. And so I lightly outline the area of the sky, the bottom portion, so that I don't accidentally go into my building. I will lightly outline it. And for large areas, usually I fill it with Copic Wide. I know they don't sell those anymore, but Copic Wide is a great tool, or the classic marker has the wider nib. It has the standard broad versus the medium broad. So that also does help a little bit. Okay, I'm going to use this medium broad, and just add in the blue really fast. So I'm going to add like three lines per side. Really quickly. And then one very big line. Okay. And now I'm going to switch to actually B01. Oh, wrong nib. I'm going to layer a little bit on top of B32. And then I'm going to add in the rest of the sky. Again, working pretty fast. Oop. Okay. So now that that's in, I know it looks very streaky right now, but this is where the super brush nib comes in. And this is why for sky, I choose pretty light colors normally. I'm going to flick this B32 upwards. There's a lot of different ways you can approach this. This one usually does work pretty well for me. So I've drawn horizontal lines, and now I'm doing some vertical flicking of that super brush nib. Flicking it up. Oh, and I think somebody asked me what kind of paper this is. This is Nina Premium Cardstock. This happens to be the 110 pound. But there's like a 65 pound also works great. We'll just make sure it's marker paper or a cardstock, because it definitely does make a difference what the paper is you use. Okay, so I'm going to flick from inside this area and I'm going to flick it up. This is B01, my lighter color. And I'm basically going from inside that area and I'm moving it up. And yes, this does, layering always makes things darker. So my sky is going to get a pretty rich, darker hue, just by the nature of layering. But by layering, you lose some of the streaks. By cross layering, I guess is what you would call this. One direction I did horizontal, this way I'm doing vertical. So literally just by doing this, you soften some of that harsh streak look. And if you want to color the sky a third time, you can use that circular technique that I did at the bottom. So I'm going to let that sit for a second to let the paper kind of soak it in. I don't want to overwhelm my page. Oh yes, watercolor paper. I would recommend hot press, because hot press watercolor paper is smooth. Cold press has more of the bumps. It can handle more water. So that might, you might need more ink for that. But hot press markers, hot press watercolor paper, great for Copic, great for multi-liner pens as well. Definitely recommend it as an alternative to cardstock. Okay, sorry. I'm going to take B00. So this is one notch lighter than the B01. And this is where I'm going to use that circle technique. And I'm just going to scumble the entire area that's in between the two colors. And by using this lighter one, it kind of lifts up both of the inks and makes them blend more together, I find. Or sometimes just using the zero colorless blender in the area where two colors intersect, that will also help soften the blend. This area is a large area, but for even larger spaces, I definitely do recommend that zero blender technique. But sometimes with this lighter pigment, it will lift the colors and lighten them enough to where they blend and soften together. And I know you might see this squeegeeing and whatnot now, but usually when it dries, it will dry flat and more lighter. So I did that a few times. And since this is a lighter color, it won't look as obvious. And so I'm going to lift this up. And you can see a much smoother blend now between those two colors, because we also added that lighter one in between to soften that blend. So I'm hoping that makes a little more sense. Of course, there is a little bit of a streak because I did the harsh medium broad side, but this does actually blend pretty well together. And then one last thing I do want to show, coloring the building itself is relatively straightforward. With the lighter colors, obviously on the outside of the building, some darker colors behind the columns because it's back in space, so that's going to be a little darker. But for the foliage, typically what I will do is also work dark to light, and I will do that scumbling effect where I take that super brush dim and I just kind of scribble in small circles in the motion so that it looks more organic. Because we are coloring an organic object, we do want to make sure it looks looser and not so rigid, especially next to a building that's very stern and stately looking. So I'm going to actually use this dark color. I'm going to deviate from this a little bit, and I'm going to outline that shape of my bush from the bottom because I don't want to cover that. And then I'm going to go in small circles up the shape about a third of the way, because I've got two other greens. So I'm just doing little circular motions. And if some of them go outside your main cluster of color, that's fine. Because there's going to be pockets of of air and like, you know, you can see through a bush. It's not just going to be one straight thickness of vegetation, but so that's why I like to kind of add that. This is my midtone. This is G24, and I'm going to overlap those areas and scumble, I think that's the right word for it, small little tight circles. So I'm holding the marker very tight in my hand here. So when I was sketching loose, I was holding it in the back of my pencil. Now to get those details, I'm getting nice and close to the edge of my tool, of my marker. I'm doing little kind of scumbling, and I'm layering a lot next to G28 because that's a very dark color. And I'll show this real quick. There we go. And so I'm scumbling and I'm adding more layers and I'm trying to get that depth. And then I'm going to add G21 right on top of that.
Shannon,
yes, I am trying. I'm seeing someone by organic. Yes, I'm trying to get it to be a natural appearance rather than just like straight up, you know, block of bush, of tree, or whatever this is. I'm just trying to add shape and body to the plant. And so I'm just trying to add the scribbling effect. And it also contrasts in this particular composition, it contrasts with the rigidity of the landscape, of the lawn, and of the building. So I'm trying to give a little juxtaposition there from what's around it on the corners of the drawing. And that's just what I'm trying to do. So that's kind of where I am right now. I know it doesn't look that great, but like from a distance, it does capture the essence of a bush. So I've done that. And then if you want, you can take maybe like, since green, usually red looks good with green, lots of contrast. So I have R46 and R43 as an option to add dots of this color to the bush to make it, you know, colorful. Maybe there's like little roses or something inside. And so if you want, you can add like a little dot of that. You can kind of turn your brush nib to give this essence, especially near the bottom. And I'll lift this up in a second. If you want, this is just an additive, but yes. So I just added a little bit speckles of red. If you want to add pink, maybe this bush down here, maybe I just dot it with the reds. It doesn't, you know, or purples even, if you want to do that. Colors that contrast against green, any of those would be great. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to show you guys. I would love to keep talking and keep showing you how to use the building, but we are at that hour mark.
Actually, Shannon, real quick, we have one question someone wanted to save for the end of class. Kathy wants to kind of go back to the beginning and talk about the grid system you're using. Using the grid system to transfer a subject like the ones you have works perfectly for something like a building. What about something that's not all straight lines or a more natural shape like a flower?
Yeah, so when you're drawing like an organic shape, I still like to use somewhat of a grid, or let's say you have, let me get a blank sheet of paper. Okay, well, let's say you have like a loose drawing that you want. So of a flower, I'm gonna have, this is my space picture plane. You just have to look at the image and identify the basic shapes. So instead of making a basic grid, putting the center of the flower here and adding the petals this way, because this is more of your straight on view. And this is why grids are nice, because it gives you a guideline as to where petals can go. If you have more of an organic shape, just start with the bones. So I always like to say that the general outline. So let's say you have a more curved or floppy flower you want to draw. So start of like the center of, I guess, the center of the flower. And then if the flower shape kind of droops down, and then start with the outline of where the petals go. And then you could start to add the petals that way, and kind of see how they group. I'm just doing this freehand here, so I'm hoping this captures the essence, but there we have more of an organic shape, but I'm still fitting the perimeter of I guess, the general outline of, the overcompassing shape of the flower. So that's why I like to start with shapes or a quote grid, because it helps you guide how far a petal should go or how far an organic shape needs to meet the edge. And so that's what I recommend. Unless you have a straight on view like this, then your basic ruler grid is going to be best. But did that help answer the question? I hope so. I see some nods, so that's good. Okay. Oh, thank you, Pat. Oh, such a nice comment. It's a compliment. Okay. Let me see. Any other questions? I'm looking at the chat right now. Yeah, I think that's about it. So thank you guys so much for joining. I know we went a little over time, but I really do appreciate you guys coming to our class. And please feel free to, oh, I have little hashtags here, make it with Michaels or Copic with us. Can you highlight my overhead desk again? I just want to, okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So we have some hashtags here, make it with Michaels. Obviously I am with Copic, and Copic with us is our hashtag. Michael Stores, Copic Official US, and then the last one here is just me. So if you want to look at more of my art, and oh yes, we will have a posting of this class in the next 24 to 48 hours. So if I went too fast, I'm sure I did. Please feel free to check the recording. They'll be available on Michael's YouTube channel. And we do have another class coming up in April, and I will be teaching how to do something very different than this, more organic, shape-based class, abstract art with your Copic markers. So I will be teaching that, and that will be in about 1 month. So if you want to join, oh yeah, she has it right there, April 8th. Okay, so it's in the chat if you want to check it out. Very different look, but I will be teaching that as well. So feel free to join. Hopefully you guys can. And yeah, I just really appreciate all you guys joining, and I'll see you hopefully in a month. Thank you so much.